Uh, okay, so I'm gonna try and make a very brief video exploring, I guess, a couple of ideas that I've had recently about my personal journey with learning, as well as sort of, I think, some general things that I think maybe aren't like universally correct, but I think maybe like partially correct for some people and like in contradiction with um, certain perspectives that I've seen, especially with regards to AI. So um, everything I'm about to say, I think it's always worth contextualizing as I don't know the data like the people who've conducted the research that I'm basing my ideas on, right? Um, I'm not an expert in all the fields at all the pointy ends where this research has been done. But I think also importantly, the other thing that's worth contextualizing everything I say um, within is this idea that science is fuzzy. The very pointy end of anything is fuzzy, right? We don't know something. We think we see it, and then we go out and we test it, and we then do like statistical analyses of data to go, yeah, this aligns with what we would expect to see based on what the idea was, or it doesn't align with it, and then we keep going. And it's an iterative process. We're always approximating for the reality, and I think maybe that's maybe sort of certainly not the perspective I got when I first started learning science, right, in school, and probably often a perspective that is missed when people draw conclusions from the research that's conducted by these experts. So that being said, then I have placed a degree of like social trust in the experts that have conducted the research that I'm going to refer to, and as such, you're also going to potentially place a degree of social trust in my interpretation of their research, right? Um, so broadly, then, what do I want to talk about? It's this idea of the literature that continues to be coming up with respect to AI, how people are using it, some personal anecdotes that I have, both in terms of my own perspective on my learning, as well as the perspective that I have and on people that I'm currently witnessing around me. Um, and then also more broadly, how this relates to some social media content that I've seen, trying to tackle the same idea I wanted to tackle, but with a different perspective. And I hope that then what I suggest will be complementary to the perspectives I've already seen. Um, so the first thing I think that's worth discussing is just generally that the trend of research coming out with respect to AI and people interactions with it, right? We'll put aside all the uh, ethics of intellectual property and of environmental impact, etc. aside temporarily. And let's just talk about like cool, like when it comes to AI, and I'm specifically referring to generative AI and LLMs, right? Um, what is it that we see generally in the trend in research of people's interactions with it uh, that seems to be like sort of how it impacts us, right? And so the without trying to remember off the top of my head a lot of the details, it's basically that LLMs are generally wrong um, a significant amount of the time. Um, maybe is a better way of putting it rather than generally. It's like they get some things right, they get some things wrong. They're inaccurate, right, by virtue of the fact that they actually uh, don't have the precision that we as people get with how we generate patterns and how we assess them for validity. So they often will have errors depending on the fields that you're testing them in. But most importantly, it's that despite those errors, we lack, generally speaking, unless we already have expertise in those fields, as individuals, the ability to critically assess that information and identify that it's bad. And so there's like two parts to that. So the first part is this. It's that AI sounds convincing. When it's presenting information, it's mathematically selecting for words that sound right, and so by virtue of that, it sounds right. Um, this is a profoundly difficult thing, obviously, to then assess if you don't know the thing that you're interacting with and you're trying to learn from AI. Um, because often it can just say something that sounds right that an expert in that field will be like, no, that's obviously wrong, but it's only through their expertise and understanding of the field already that they're able to do that. The second aspect is this. AI makes content consumption very easy. Um, so to the point that uh, and there's a lot of facets to this, but the first one is to the point that experts in one field can read something on AI, notice where it makes all its mistakes, and then immediately read something in a field that they aren't experts in, also written by AI, and seemingly just be convinced by the idea. It's like it sounds right. So we are very easily misled by AI in spite of awareness of its shortcomings. Um, the second part of that and how this relates to learning is uh, that not only are we then, if we're trying to learn, unable to assess for the accuracy of the information that we're being presented, but the second part that we know is that um, the highest degree of learning in people comes from points of high friction. That is to say, where things are easy, where things are palatable, less learning occurs. This is in the absence of AI. This is just generally speaking, right? Where there is struggle, more learning occurs versus where there is less struggle, right? And so there's this interesting balance then um, that I think theoretically arises from this, which is that learning something new for the first time um, takes multiple attempts because if it's genuinely new to you, the first part of learning is even understanding that the thing that you're encountering even exists. And then you go a layer deeper, and in what ways does it exist? And then you go a layer deeper, and it's a recursive activity that only repeated revisiting allows you to sort of develop a more refined model of whatever it is that you're trying to learn, right? And so this is effectively what school does, right? Not in a specific sense for any one particular subject. It's actually we learn the process of learning theoretically when we go through the education system. It's why, generally speaking, we've seen general cognitive improvements across the board in people spending more time in school and doing it longer, up until very recently. Separate thing. We won't get into the research around that. So then, how does this relate to AI? Well, very specifically, it's that AI all too easily, unless you put safeguards in place, um, robs an individual of their ability to do that point of friction in connecting an idea for the first time. Um, and it can do it so effectively that it pretty much removes the whole process. The best example to think of this is, and there's a fun paper that's just recently been published, I think in 2025 that I just encountered, that demonstrates this. And, credit to the person that I learned about this from, right? Like, I'm just stealing somebody else's idea who stole somebody else's idea. That's, like knowledge is derivative in nature, right? But the idea basically was, hey, if we get people to do maths and we either give them uh, unprotected access to AI, give them guardrailed AI, or don't give them AI at all, how do they perform in tests versus how well do they perform how do they perform in practice tests versus how do they perform in a real test where they're unassisted. And so obviously it's what you'd expect. The people with AI do incredibly well when they're doing the practice tests, and then they get to the actual real test and they're terrible. It's because the AI, they just go to the AI gives them the answer because that's really what they're being, they're doing that. And that makes sense from a human perspective. It's very simple, right? It's the most efficient path to the task that you're being given, which is to find the answer. And that's not the same as learning, right? Because learning requires friction, and effectively we're giving somebody a tool that allows them to smooth out that whole process and remove all of the friction, right? And so you test them later and they're very, very bad. They don't do very well. And that ties into like another aspect, which I already brought up, which is uh, what they found is that the people who were using the AI thought they did just as well as everybody else on the final test when they didn't have AI assistance. So it's interesting. It's hard for you to realize how AI is interfering with your ability to learn as it interferes with your ability to learn, right? Um, and so tying into my anecdotal experience in terms of what I've seen first, and then I'll talk about my own perspective. So what I've seen first is this. I am surrounded by a lot of people using AI, but in particular, there's a couple of people that I'm talking in particular with regards to how they use AI. And they use AI pretty much for everything, is what I'm seeing generally speaking. Not just for their work, but even for their own personal pursuits. Uh, and I've had to ask one of them in particular some very serious questions about what it is that they actually want to achieve with their pursuit. So this person is new to music and is wanting to create music and doesn't have the technical ability to do all the facets of the things that they want to create. And so they're using AI to supplement that. And again, without getting into the ethics of how the AI is trained in the first place, or the broader social impact of using an AI instead of a person to do that for them. The broader question I asked them was this: is, hey, you're 6 months in, and this is the kind of stuff that you're able to make with AI. And I listened to some of the songs that they made, and I have some personal opinions on those that I shared. But the broader question that I asked them is, well, do you want to be just as good as you are right now in 6 more months or in 2 years, right? Or do you want to be better? And it's a very interesting thing to watch them mull this over. And I won't go too much into sort of how they started thinking about this question, but the more important thing is like if they did want to be better, regardless of how well they know the literature, and I only know it to some extent as well. There are people who know it better than I. The short answer is AI is robbing them of the ability to improve. That is effectively the short answer. It's carting out the point of friction where they might want to do a thing and they don't know how to do it, and without AI they would be forced to explore and navigate and learn new facets of music theory, for example, in order to be able to then achieve the thing that they wanted to be able to achieve. Lastly, then, I guess like tying this into my own personal experience, and how this ties to some content that I've seen. Personally, I have all sorts of reasons for why I choose not to use AI, but I do very occasionally use it, and there's a very cognizant risk that I see more broadly with even when I choose to use it and how I choose to use it, the potential social impacts of using it. But in the simplest sense, the times when I'm using AI are more a result of me attempting to investigate what it is that I need to investigate in the first place. There's a lot of branching fields that I'm realizing I need to really wrap my head around with respect to a very like key core idea that I think might be right and I would hopefully want to eventually formalize. And in order to formalize it, like I firstly just need to see if it generally is consistently correct. And to do that, because of its broad applicability, I need to look at a lot of different things, a lot of different ideas. And very occasionally, when I search for something in Google, the AI summary will give me a starting point that isn't I think, an end point, but more a beginning of, okay, as I search for this specific thing, and I'm far more interested in Wikipedia articles, the AI has grabbed, probably, most of the time I check the sources, and most of the time it's referencing at least a Wikipedia article, oftentimes in tandem with an academic forum or a more specific website with regards to the topic I'm searching, but it'll present me often with like an initial idea tied to that first idea that I was looking for. Um, and here's the key bit, right? Is I don't end my search there because I've got no idea how those two things are connected from the AI, right? It tells me that they are, but it wasn't even the thing I was looking for in the first place. I was looking for a very specific thing. It just gives me an extra thing, right? It adds to my list of things to understand. And I think using AI with respect to that, where it isn't providing an answer, but as somebody who is effectively engaging in entirely self-directed learning now, um, it is effectively functioning as a tutor. It's like, hey, you're thinking of this, and this idea might also be related, right? And importantly, I treat it the way I treat any source, which is like there's a degree of effectively social trust that I'm giving it. But the most important thing is I go and I check it later. And later may not be immediately. Later may be 1, 2, however many months down the line. But I do go and check it. And I think there's something really interesting about that, though, which I still think is really important, which is that um, I'm very conscious of not letting that be my default. I prefer wiki articles always over AI summaries because people who are generally speaking going to be more understanding and expert in the fields that they're editing those articles uh, about. Let me rephrase that. I got all my English mixed up. The people who are editing those articles about those specific topics are typically going to be more expert and are vetted by other experts. So that's actually really important to me. It's like there is somebody checking the checker, right? Um, and secondly, as well, it's that Wikipedia articles don't make it easy to understand them when they're about very technical things. So often I end up down a rabbit hole of various terms with regards to a specific field before I understand the fundamental thing and then can build back up to the article that I'm initially reading, right? And this is, again, very much like I'm just exploring different ideas. It's certainly nothing like doing practice questions or going a step beyond and being very familiar with something and then synthesizing it with something else that you're also very familiar with, right? Like there's all sorts of layers above like what I'm doing is a pursuit of um, in pursuit of me trying to formalize this idea, right? It's like the first part of the formalization process is I need to do a lot of personal research. And when it comes to the beginning of personal research, I mean it in the learning sense, not in the gathering data sense, right? I need to understand very deeply the full fields, the fullness of all the fields that my idea might be touching on. And because there's a lot of them, I'm starting with very key different ones so that I get a general feeling for, okay, if it works here and it works here, it probably works for these things in between and I can check those later. But I should start here and start here because I'm more likely to find discrepancy with the universal applicability of my theory and find an issue with it if I start in very different directions rather than picking one thing and then picking the thing that's really similar to it and then picking the next thing that's really similar to it. It's like it might take me far longer to figure out like if my idea is right or if it needs refining or if it's just wrong. Or better yet, if somebody else has explored it, right? Um, and what I feel I'm encountering at the moment is that generally speaking, I see that lots of people have explored, I think, my idea in their specific fields. But so far, I haven't found anybody who's gone, hey, it seems that there's this universal trend in these different kinds of explorations, and maybe that's like worth formalizing itself. Um, Lastly, how this ties into social media. I see videos about how to rebuild your attention span, etc. And some of them I think are rooted in very good ideas. The general one being that it's not pure discipline that will get you there. Uh, but what I think is more interesting is this idea of interest itself. It's that I understand that uh, I have a brain that it's reward seeking, like everybody's brain, but mine is especially reward seeking. Like if you hadn't figured it out, I've got very, very severe ADHD. And if I understand how my brain works from that perspective, it would be foolish of me to try and make it work in a way that it isn't chemically set up to work in. Um, and instead, then the intentionality that I have isn't around uh, avoiding uh, the intentionality that I have with my brain isn't around um, discipline or willpower, but rather in avoiding the situations that may require discipline or willpower in the first place. And more importantly, then manufacturing the kinds of situations that will allow me to more easily pursue the things that I might otherwise find difficult. And so a lot of that has come from just the last decade plus that I've had um, basically not in a disgusting household like I grew up in, and having to then learn about myself and become emotionally mature and do all this personal development to then have the tools to be able to go, oh, now that I understand how I work, I'm going to take advantage of that and make more intentional decisions about where I want to be in 10 years or 20 years. And I think that last bit is maybe lost a little bit, I think, in the perspective that people offer on social media when it comes to attention span and AI, which is that I just don't ever see it rooted in this idea generally of like what it is that somebody wants to actually do. Um, yeah, I'll end that idea there and leave the rest for you guys to think about yourself.